Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. No need to adjust your screens. Once again, I'm joined with Dr. T.C. Fuller. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. And of course, I'm not in my normal location. I'm actually in an Airbnb in Asheville, North Carolina, on a little vacation with my lovely bride for our anniversary.
It's what, 32?
32 years, yeah.
That is a patient woman.
Okay, let's see. We got people popping on already, TC. Okay, we got 7 folks joining us. Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich, joined again by Dr. T.C. Fuller. And we'll get a few more people on here. We're up to, well, we got 15 already. I guess we can get started, TC. Hey,
Okay.
Before we do though, man, I wanted to say a big shout out to the folks at Appalachian Standard. If you've been listening to the American Warrior Show, then you're aware of Appalachian Standard as a sponsor of the American Warrior Show. But they're also, for the next six episodes or so, they're going to be a sponsor of Coffee with Rich. So they make all the hemp products that I use for my joints, for my cognitive ability, for sleeping, anything and everything. They have a CBD mentholated salve that I put on my muscles after a workout or whatever. So I encourage you to check them out. Everything's in the show notes. We got a discount code for you, AWS15 for 15% off all your orders. Please check out everything they're doing over there. They're veteran-owned craft hemp growers growing some amazing products, from propagation to products right here in the beautiful Appalachian Mountains. So check them out. All right, with that out of the way, Dr. Fuller, sir, can you reintroduce our audience to yourself, please?
Sure. I guess we can go a little bit more briefly since I'm now apparently striving for co-host status. Originally from California, learned to shoot in California, oddly enough. Grew up out there, went to college out there, got my undergrad out of Fresno State, went in the Army, was on active duty for quite some time. And then when I left the Army, I'd been an infantry guy for the first Gulf War. Then I was a bomb disposal guy for the last few years, and then went to the FBI, did 20 years in the FBI, and now retired and doing some consulting, some teaching, some writing, generally living the dream, as they say.
Indeed you are, sir. Hey, go ahead and like and share. If you're just jumping on, we got a great show for you today. We'll see who's on here real quick. We got Will is on, Adam, Gilly from the Philippines. Good morning, Gilly. Donald. My brother Jeff is on. Good morning, Jeff. Derek, Walt, Vince, Will. We'll see you next week out at the Firearms Instructor Development course that Mike and I are teaching in Oklahoma next week. Looking forward to that. Our good friend, Attorney Andrew Branca is on this morning. Good morning, Andrew. Terry is on, James, Ty. Wow, lots of folks on there. Jared says, hemp for your joints. There's no THC, LOL. There is a little bit amount. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. I think I told you, TC. So my buddy Jesse, we're in the Marine Corps together, and he owns Appalachian Standard. And he decides that he's like, hey, Rich, man, I was on their live stream giving some tips because their demographic is like 18 to 20 something year old females, TC. So they're like, hey, can you give our young ladies on their live stream some self-defense tips? I'm like, all right, we'll wing some out there. And so afterwards he's like, hey, let's go check out the growing operation. So he missed a code in the ADT system. We went into the warehouse and I'm standing in front of bales of hemp. The silent alarm goes off. The police show up, and here I am. When they open the door, there's a African-American female police officer with her hand on her gun looking at me in front of a bale of what appears to be marijuana. And of course, the whole place smells like marijuana. I just put my hands up like, this isn't what it looks like. Look like a scene from Breaking Bad or something. But anyway.
No. I'm really a retired Marine, honest. Yeah. Please don't kill me.
Please don't kill me. Anyway, good times. Okay, so TC, thanks for reintroducing yourself to the audience. I'm sure most people do know you. Having said all that, and your background in the military and law enforcement, what is your opinion of where we're at today as far as law enforcement?
Well, it's a rough time in the old town tonight, huh?
Yeah.
I've told a lot of people lately, it's a really good time to be a retired Leo. Uh, I do not envy the jobs being held by my colleagues and friends in law enforcement these days. It's a really rough time. Some of the folks that are on here today, I know, are serving law enforcement officers in some major metropolitan police departments. Um, they've got a really rough row to hoe. It's oftentimes I hear people equate things to the 60s and the 70s, the unrest then. I think we've got a different animal that we're dealing with now, in as much as political leadership has largely abandoned these hardworking, selfless public servants. In addition to sort of the mob rule that we seem to be kowtowing to lately. It's a tough spot. It's a really tough spot, and I don't know how it's going to end. I mean, I can't imagine that it's easy to recruit. I imagine that retention numbers are plummeting, and that becomes a long-term issue for some of these big communities that are having problems now.
What about qualified immunity? How do you think that's going to play out? And explain a little bit about that, will you please, to the audience that's not familiar with that?
Sure. And apologies to the attorneys in the crowd if I screw this up, but qualified immunity, in essence, I'm going to boil this down, means that if you are performing your job in good faith, you're immune from civil lawsuit. They can't sue you. And that goes all the way back to a time in British common law where you could not, and there's a term for it that escapes me this morning, but you could not sue the sovereign. You couldn't go after the federal government or the regal government at the time. And that actually applies in U.S. law today. Only the U.S. government has said, yeah, okay, we will step back from that. You can sue us as an entity. But in large part, if you were doing your job, again, in good faith, you can't go out there and say, oh, I didn't know when you did, or I didn't intend when you did. But if you're doing the job in good faith, you can't be sued for it. Your department can be sued. You can be named in the suit, but you're not going to get banged for it if you're doing the job the way you're supposed to be doing. Interestingly enough, they want to pull it from the police officers on the street, but nobody's talking about pulling it from the prosecutors. And we can go chapter and verse on some of the blatant misuse of power that we've seen in some of these larger communities by prosecutors of late.
Yeah, but with regard to the prosecutors, I think Nifong was probably the first one that I was aware of. Was it the Duke lacrosse team that he railroaded? And then you have, what was the one in Baltimore?
Oh, yeah. Andrew Bronca's on this morning. He can go for hours on her.
She's
still there. She's still there, and she's still a public servant. But he'll probably type it in here in a second. But they just pulled it from the folks out in Colorado, as I understand. And I don't know that I would do the job.
I don't know.
I have a very good friend who has been a police officer for the better part of 20 years. I met him in the police academy. And when I was one of his instructors, it gives you an idea of how old I am. And I was talking to him the other day, and he's thinking about leaving law enforcement.
Yeah.
And specifically because of that, he's willing, like most police officers. Marilyn Mosby, that's right.
Right. That's her.
Like most police officers, you accept the physical threat to yourself when you take the job. You should, and most do, understand how dangerous the job is for you. But you always have had the idea in the back of your head that, look, if I go, my family isn't going to, they'll lose me, and that will be impactful, but they're not going to be destitute, right? They're not going to debtor's prison. They're not going to be out of the house and home and hearth. Well, now that changes, right? Now, if I take this job, I'm not just risking my own skin, but I'm risking the fiscal well-being of my family, because now I can be sued and into oblivion. And let's face it, these days, the lawsuit alone is punishment, right? Going through that and paying for it and coming up with the money and the impact on your career, that's destructive in a big way. Well, now they're going to take away the coverage that you had. And now I go out and do something in good faith, do my job, like the officers in Atlanta arguably did their job in good faith. And then I'm going to lose my home. My kids aren't going to college. I'm out on the street. My career is destroyed. Who would do that? Who would voluntarily put themselves in that level of danger? The risk levels are so high that it becomes, in a simple cost benefit analysis, it's easier to go to work at Starbucks, or go be a fireman. Go, if you still want to serve, go do something else, but you're not going to go into law enforcement.
No, and that, what kind of person are you going to get that's willing to do that job? I have no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that it'll be the people that you want.
No.
Right. It will be people who are more megalomaniacal, perhaps, people who are fascinated with the power and the perceived authority of the position, people that have nothing to risk. Right. You can sue me, but I don't have anything. People who aren't necessarily invested in the communities they live in and they serve. And, is that really who you want as law enforcement?
No.
And then what happens is, okay, we, as a community, we can't get anybody to come and police our community. So do we lower the standards so that we can get people in? And now we have, as a body, worse employees? Or do we pay more money and then now it costs the city even more to get the kind of people in here that we want? I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the current course is not being well thought out.
Did you see Andrew's comment says officers in Colorado are now personally liable for 5% of whatever amount their department decides to settle a civil suit for, even if the officer doesn't agree with the settlement, doesn't concede his own liability. And of course, that's attorney Andrew Branco with the law of self-defense. And my God, man.
Yeah, 5%. Well, a city like Denver can slap down $1 million, $2 million, $5 million and keep right on trucking.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about your bank account, but if you hit me for $250,000 cash, I'm screwed.
Oh, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's my house. That's my kids' college funds. That's my cars, everything.
Yeah.
I've worked a lifetime to assemble, and now you're going to take it because somebody makes a claim and the city doesn't want to fight them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you've been a police officer for any length of time, you've been sued. I mean, I think I was. It never went to court, but I broke a guy's arm one time.
It happens.
Putting on an arm bar, and he was violently resistant. Hey, man, that's on you, pal. That is not my intent. And of course, it didn't go anywhere. The technique was good. It was all on videotape. It was a nothing burger, but just that, uneasy feeling of, oh my God, I'm being sued for doing my job. This guy was trying to fight and kill me. I used the least amount of force that was reasonable, necessary, and appropriate at the time. It was well documented with video evidence, and he still is trying to sue me. I mean, yeah. And now to say that 5%, holy cow.
Yeah. And that's a very, very tough spot to be in. Much like my dog wandering in here and whining while I'm trying to talk. Yeah. She's 14 and it's a rough time for the dog. You're blind in one eye, deaf in both ears. She's struggling. But yeah, I don't know how you attract somebody into that environment. A new person coming right out of college, looking at a variety of career tracks, and they see what's going on now. That's a hard pass. And off I go to do something else. So where are we in 5 years?
I don't know. TC, I don't know if you remember the corruption of, it might have been the late 80s or mid 90s down in New Orleans because they weren't paying their police officers well. They weren't training them well, and they defunded a lot of the department. And we've seen how this plays out, I think, haven't we?
Oh, we absolutely have. The New Orleans busts there was a lot of them that were done by the FBI. And you had murder for hire being run out of New Orleans Police Department, but you were paying them in the late 90s. Some of these cops were pulling down $12,000 a year, $15,000 a year.
Yeah.
To be police officers, you're giving an awful lot of authority to individuals that you're not giving a whole lot of money to. And you're putting them in a position where, hey, look, I've got kids to feed. I've got a house to pay for. I've got bills and I can't afford them. I have to do something else. Certainly the vast majority of them are going to do the right thing, because that's kind of who we default to hire. And we have extensive processes to ensure that we hire the right people. But in any body of folk, you're going to get a percentage that are not going to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened in New Orleans. And you had a real systemic problem there. And a lot of guys went to prison, guys and girls. A lot of people went to federal prison over that.
Yeah, and as they should. Andrew says Leo liability insurance won't protect the officer from murder charges if he shoots a violent suspect trying to taser the officer into helplessness. Yeah, no, I'm afraid it won't. If you're just joining us right now, folks, you're on Coffee with Rich. Welcome. We're on with Dr. T.C. Fuller, again, retired FBI agent, former Army officer, and combat veteran. And we are discussing some law enforcement issues that are facing our country today. And TC, I live in the middle of rural America, right? And you've been to my house before. You know where I live in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee. Well, now we're in Asheville, North Carolina, and it used to be a funky little city, people playing bongos on the streets and stuff like that. We really like to come up here and got some nice craft brewery scenes. And then we come here and to this weekend, it's been very, you can see the damage from some of the riots. The monuments have been graffitied and torn apart. And I just don't know where this country's heading, man. Do you have anything in your crystal ball that tells us where we're heading?
I don't. I just, part of me is, oh my God, this is the end of the world, right? Part of me is like, okay, we've been through hard times before as a nation, try to take a little bit more of a longer term view. I wonder, given my federal law enforcement background, I wonder about, destabilization operations. Where's the money coming for all this? That's always kind of my default position. Who's paying for this? Because that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. Are we being, the victims of internal strife with the fans being flamed by other nation states? I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy guy, and I certainly don't have access to the information I used to have access to. Despite the fact that my wife is still a serving FBI agent, I don't, we don't talk about work just because that's sort of the presets around here. I worry. Certainly I worry. I worry about the world that my children are going to inherit. I worry about this mob rule becoming the new normal, right? I mean, with these improved methodologies of communication, any nutbag in a basement can suddenly have a national podium, and they can attract other folk. And, they want to go out and riot and burn in response to their dislike of the current president or their, perceived wrongs of 100 years ago or whatever their issue is. They can go out and riot. Well, I'm worried about where we are in 5 years. Okay, so the current president leaves; he'll be gone in 5 years, regardless of how the next election works out. What happens if this is now our response to things that we don't like by the government, right? So then we get a left-leaning president. How is the right going to act? Or do we get another right-leaning president? And how is the left going to act then? How is the media going to play into all this? Because I really think they've abdicated a lot of their responsibilities in terms of calming people down. They seem to be, clickbaiting everybody and fanning the flames of this stuff so that people are glued to their televisions. I mean, you and I were talking the other day. If I wasn't watching the news, I wouldn't know 90% of this is going on.
Yeah.
Right. Because in my community, I picked my community very carefully. Its life is normal. I mean, I saw a Black Lives Matter protest about 2 weeks ago. It was 15 suburban white guys and girls standing on a corner with some handmade signs that said, such bon mots as "science is violence" and Black Lives Matter. It's not an issue where I live, but it is clearly an issue nationwide. And where we're going to be in a year and in 5 years, I certainly have my concerns. I think everybody should have their concerns and be worried about this.
No, I agree with you. And with regard to concerns, if you're just joining us right now, we're on with Dr. T.C. Fuller, retired FBI agent. Thank you to the 41 folks that are joining us. Please like and share. I think, let's go back to the beginning of this current era's trouble and strife. One of the touch points, the George Floyd incident that we've all seen, the 8-minute and whatever 46-second video. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. My default setting is pro law enforcement. Given my background, that shouldn't surprise anybody. I've conducted in the course of my career more than my fair share of color of law violations, investigations, federal investigations of local and state police officers. Not to mention, I've got friends and colleagues from 20 years in service that are still doing the job. So my default setting in that is, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? You fight with the police, you have to lose. You may win the battle, you got to lose the war. Had Mr. Floyd gone along with the program and been arrested and fought his day in court, I have to believe he'd be here alive today. That being said, the optics on that video are terrible. Right. I haven't done the investigation. I don't know the full set of circumstances surrounding it. I try not to jump to a conclusion, but the video that I've seen looks bad. Just does. And you've got an in custody death. Anybody who's been a law enforcement officer for more than a hot second knows that an in custody death is a big deal, right? Absent all the reaction that we've seen since Mr. Floyd passed, that would have been a huge problem for that officer to begin with, right? There'd have been a huge internal investigation. It would have been a homicide investigation, and rightly it should have been. Well, that's going on now, but obviously under a significantly different political situation. So what I think happened there, clearly something that shouldn't have happened. What the specifics are, I don't know, and I don't feel like I should comment too much because I'm ignorant. And it would be very easy for a couple of simple facts to pop up now that I'm unaware of today that changes that entire dynamic. I just don't know. I do know that these guys are screwed, right? These cops, they're done. When the state gets done with them, if the state somehow doesn't convict them, they're going to face a federal investigation and probably federal prosecution. Okay. So that incident is going to be torn apart and looked at every which way. There'll be books written about it. I'm sure there'll be classes written about it, or classes given at colleges about it. That's going to happen. So I'm on the fence, I guess is the way I say it, and which probably is going to offend somebody. Does it look bad? Certainly it looks bad. Should the hit Floyd have died? You'd like to think no. Was Floyd an active contributor to his own death? Yes. All right. Were the police officers contributors? That's up to the ME, not up to me. I don't think that Floyd is who you want as your standard bearer for Black Lives Matter. Yes, his death was unfortunate and potentially avoidable. Should it be something that we should be upset about? It's not for me to say, probably. But let's face it, the guy's a career criminal. The odds were pretty good that he wasn't going to live a long and fruitful life. So is he the one you want to rally around? I wouldn't, but others might.
Fair enough. Let's talk about, let's see what else we have on the agenda today. I was going to talk about Chaz, but it looks like they went in and took Chaz down. Have you seen any of the news on that?
A little bit. I've made a habit lately of avoiding the news. My wife watches it daily for work. I tend to just take my kids into another room and watch something on the Disney Channel because I can't take it anymore. And the Chaz thing, just every time I watch any news coverage of it, I end up throwing things at my television and yelling at it and walking out of the room. I can't take it. It just drives me nuts that a bunch of these knuckleheads were allowed to take over the middle of a major U.S. metropolitan city. It was they had to clear it out eventually. It just had to go. Waiting for these folks to drift off, I guess, would have worked. It seemed to have worked with Occupy Wall Street. But as soon as you have them dropping bodies in the street, no, you can't put up with that. And it's ridiculous that they even thought they could put up with that, right? You just can't cede sections of cities to criminals. You can't do that. And the idea that this mayor had that we can do that and it's going to be okay. It's the summer of love.
That was my favorite, by the way. The summer of love.
The summer, really? Because I remember watching video of the summer of love. My mom was a participant in the summer of love. I don't remember quite so many M4s and pistols in the videos.
You might be a product of the summer of love, TC.
Well, I was born about then. Yeah, it's a distinct possibility. Let's move on from that, shall we? But you can't cede sections of the city and then say, okay, law enforcement, we're going to take away all of your crowd control devices, all of your pepper spray, all of your sting balls, all of your. So what are you leaving with? You're going to go in there and clean it out with riot batons? Having been hit with a baton, having been sprayed with pepper, having been shot with pepper balls, I'll take the pepper spray any day over getting a hickory shampoo.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Somebody comes and tunes you up with a riot baton. That's a whole different animal. So like in so many things, you've got people making decisions that aren't necessarily in the best place to make those decisions, right? So the mayor should be in a position to say, yes, clean it out. The mayor shouldn't be saying, clean it out, but do this way and that way and this way. Don't talk to me about the tactics. Talk to me about the strategy. Let the professionals handle the tactics.
That's right.
Same thing happened over in your state here last week, right? Where they told them to go in and clean out some rioters and remove all of their protective gear, their face shields and their batons and their, I thought I read about it maybe in Knoxville. I might have to wrong. Yeah, where the order was given that they couldn't wear any of their riot protection gear and they had to go in and clean this area out. Well, you can imagine how the police officers reacted to that.
I remember when I was a police officer, when I was a corrections officer, we couldn't wear those hatch gloves, that have Kevlar to keep you from getting stuck by a needle,
right,
because they were black. And they're like, no, those are too intimidating. You can't wear those. If you can find ones that are yellow or white or orange, you can wear those. I'm like, who gives a crap, man? I just don't want to take hepatitis home to my family. You know what I'm saying? Or God knows something else.
Yeah, a friend of mine punched a guy one time wearing a set of those gloves with the knuckle covers.
Mm-hmm.
And after the fact, his department decided that was an impact weapon, and he had struck the suspect in the head with an impact weapon, and that was the end of his job. I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. But again, people who aren't necessarily experts in a field making decisions for those who are experts in the field.
Speaking of that, making decisions that people that weren't there, how is, we talked about George Floyd. Tell us about Rashad Brooks and how, if any, there's a differentiation between what we see in one video and vice another one.
Well, I think right off the top is one person died in custody and one person did not. So I think that's a fairly glaring difference, right? Excuse me. Two, one of them was actively resisting. Right. So you've got a guy who, the video evidence that I've seen, at least, was quite calm until he wasn't. Right. Yep. And every law enforcement officer watching the show this morning knows that that's pretty much how it goes. Yep. People are calm and collected until they aren't. Of course, the big moment is when you go to put the bracelets on. Right. Everybody's calm and collected until they feel that cold steel hit that wrist. And that's when the fight is generally on. And again, every law enforcement officer in here can tell a story that involves exactly that. Things were going great. And then I got punched in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy he made a series of bad decisions in Atlanta, right? He chose to drink. He chose to get behind the wheel, and then he chose to fight. And then he chose to take the taser. And he chose to point, what appeared to be a weapon, and what indeed was a weapon, at the police officers. I mean, he chose to walk up this use of force continuum. Getting shot under those circumstances, in my mind, is sort of the logical conclusion to a series of bad decisions, right? You make those kind of stupid decisions, you're going to get a stupid prize. And it's tragic, right? None of those cops got up that morning and said, I'm going to kill somebody today.
All right.
You don't get into the law enforcement game to kill somebody. You get there to save people. That's where cops take pride. They really take pride. You talk to anybody who's ever been in law enforcement. If they've saved a life on the job, that's a story they want to tell.
Yeah.
Right? Talk to that same guy. If he's killed somebody, that's a story he doesn't want to tell. And there's a reason for that. Those guys didn't want to kill him. He put them in a situation where they really felt like they had no safe alternative. So I think there's a glaring difference in the facts there. And then, of course, the prosecutor's response to that is just ridiculous. He'll lose at trial if this ever goes to trial on those two officers. But that's really not his goal, right? His goal isn't necessarily to win, to put them in prison. He doesn't care. He doesn't care one way or the other about those two cops. What he does care about is his own hide and his own political future. Here he has kowtowed to the mob, right? He's thrown a couple of sacrificial lambs out the door. He's, virtue signaled in a big way. He'll be a big player in the Democratic Party henceforth. He'll be a big player down there in the community henceforth. I've heard rumors that he's under investigation himself for a variety of crimes. He's certainly pulled the, look at the monkey trick, right? Don't look over here, look over here. That works real well, right? And if these cops, their punishment will be going through the process, right? Their careers are ruined.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they won't be able to go be a cop anywhere, right? They'll have to get into another profession. They're going to have to come up with a whole lot of money to defend themselves and to live, right? Because they don't have an income anymore. They don't have money coming in. I'm sure they have bills and things they have to pay for. So they're going to be destitute, financially ruined, and survive the trial. And as any trial attorney will tell you, you got a 10% chance once this gets in front of a jury, there's always a chance of losing. They probably won't lose. They shouldn't lose, but they could. So they got that axe hanging over their head for the next several years. Meanwhile, the prosecutor, it's a big win for him. He can virtue signal all day long. If he wins, he can trumpet about how he won. If he loses, he can trumpet about how the system is rigged against him.
That's exactly right.
So there's really no downside for him.
I always thought, TC, that, and I'm going to go back to, I think it was March of 1991. You and I were probably in the Middle East somewhere doing our thing. And KLTA received this footage from, I think, a guy named Holiday who had filmed this traffic stop that ended with one guy getting, struck with PR-24s, and a gentleman by the name of Mr. Rodney King. Of course, we never talk about the two other people that were in the vehicle with him that didn't get a scratch on them because they lawfully complied with the arrest and walked away, without a scratch. But my point is, KLTA rips out the 10 seconds that leads to the police officer subduing him, so you don't see context. So I always thought, this couldn't happen in an era where you get the whole context of the situation. But here we have the Rashad Brooks in Atlanta. We've got video evidence from every conceivable angle. It is absolutely crystal clear a lawful use of force, in my opinion, from what I can see. Right. And yet we still have the DA. But like you said, I think it goes to exactly what you said. It's virtue signaling. It's a win either way for him. So there's zero loss to that district attorney, right?
Right. There's no downside to him. There really is. Because nobody's going to come back after him for a frivolous prosecution. I mean, you can look back at Zimmerman, right?
Yeah.
The evidence in that case was overwhelmingly clear that what he said happened was pretty close to what exactly happened. Doesn't matter, right? You've got a whole nother propaganda machine out there pushing a different narrative, and it's a very visceral narrative. It's an emotional narrative. I mean, if you believe that narrative, you're right to be pissed off, right? If you believe that George Zimmerman was out hunting a black man one night and found one and killed him while he was just out going for a little bag of Skittles, then yeah, that's a horrible story. And who wouldn't be upset about it? The problem is it's not true. It simply isn't backed up by the evidence. And the same thing is happening here with these guys in Atlanta. What has happened is an unarmed black man has died, is the narrative, right? Murdered by rampaging out of control police officers. And that is a visceral argument that, it resonates with a certain demographic. And you've now got a social media machine that will fan those flames. You've got a professional media organizations that will fan those flames. And you've got a ready crew of folk out there that will respond inappropriately and burn down the Wendy's and, tear down statues and break things and destroy things and injure and kill people. It's a bad set of circumstances being made worse by people who should know better.
Yeah. So look, I want to get to a couple of comments here. Sean is on. Good morning. I think Sean was one of the co-hosts of the Gun Variety podcast. Good morning, Sean. We've also got TC says, in one lawyer's view, taser used defensively equals less than lethal weapon. Taser used offensively, deadly force weapon, death, or serious bodily harm. So say you, TC.
No, that's actually Andrew Bronca said that.
Yeah. You agree with that?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I mean, the police officer is going to use a taser because he doesn't want to hurt somebody. He doesn't want to shoot somebody, right? I mean, that's the whole intent behind that gun or behind that weapon. Somebody who shoots a police officer with a taser, that's not necessarily their intent. Maybe it's their intent, but the problem is we don't know. And the law doesn't require us to find out, right? So bad guy shoots a police officer and disables him with pepper spray or with a taser. Well, there's a gun present. Yeah. What is his intent? Well, we already know his intent has been demonstrated to this point by the fact that he attacked a police officer, that he's willing to, he's non-compliant with the lawful commands of the uniformed police officer. He's attacked the police officer and physically assaulted him. So now we're into violent felony category. And now he's taken the taser. The other problem with the thing in Atlanta is just because he has a taser that he took from the police officer doesn't mean he didn't bring his own gun.
Right.
Right. So I'm chasing a guy. He turns around and points something at me. I know he's got a taser. I don't know if he has a handgun or not. He's pointing something at me. Neither law nor policy, and at least in the FBI, required me to let him fire that gun at me, whatever it is, so that I could figure out how to respond. Right? The law requires me to be reasonable, right? Objectively and subjectively reasonable in my response. Well, my response to you being non-compliant with my commands, violently resisting me, stealing one of my defensive tools, and fleeing to potentially a position of tactical advantage, and then pointing what appears to be a gun at me, you're going to get shot. I mean, to the degree I can, stop you from doing all this, you haven't responded to verbal commands. You haven't responded to me going hands-on. You're not cooperating all the way up till now, and now you're violently resisting me and pointing weapons at me. That's not a formula for long-term survivability, in my mind.
Yeah. Andrew also says the law of self-defense for politically motivated prosecutors, the definition of success is not conviction of the defendant. It's the process of seeking the conviction of the defendant. Worked for Angela Corey, referencing Zimmerman, Marilyn Mosby, referencing the Baltimore cops in the Freddie Gray case, working for today's prosecutors. Yeah, I think Andrew makes a great point, TC, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, that the template has been laid down. These politically motivated prosecutors know what they need to do to, like you said, virtue signal number one, punish without some sort of, punishment, just by putting them and their families through this and send a signal to everybody, man. But before you go there, I want to talk to what Sean just said. Sean says the truth doesn't matter, and it never mattered. And I think Sean's talking about a certain demographic, whether that be the media or whether that be certain members of the community that look for these kind of things to further their agenda. What do you think?
Well, it's perception management, right? I mean, or spin, however you want to put it. People are playing to their demographic. They're playing to their target audience. Our president is very good at it, right? Whether you like him or hate him, he's very good at playing to his target audience. What passes for national leadership in Congress is very good at it. And if you think about it, what's that knucklehead's name up in New York? AOC is her abbreviated initial. The 29-year-old former bartender that's now a congresswoman. She's making national headlines. She won an election. She won a primary with 4,000 votes, 6,000 votes.
All right.
And it's Democrat plus, 14 is how it's rated. So it's solidly Democrat. You win the primary there, you're taking the election.
Yep.
So based on a vote of 4,000 or 6,000 people, we're now nationally stuck with her because she's very good at perception management, right? She targeted her audience, played to them, and they voted for her. So you've got a whole lot of people that are playing to their target demographics. And in the case of these, DAs, that's exactly how it works for them. And I don't mean to say that this isn't applicable to all of us, right? I do it in my house, right? I play to my target audience. I tell my wife what she wants to hear. And more often than not, she hears what she wants to hear, whether that's what I intended to say or not. So we all have experience with that. I simply use the politicians as a large scale. But these prosecutors can play to their voting base, right? Mm-hmm. Marilyn Mosby she didn't care the word for a second about Freddie Gray or about the 6 officers that she accused of murder. And she didn't care. What's she doing? She's virtue signaling to the crowd. She's playing to her audience, right? If she tried that in Dallas, Texas, I think it would go much differently, right? Different demographic, different target audience. But it flew where she lives and works. And that's all she cares about. There doesn't seem to be this overarching sense of right and wrong anymore that's based even remotely on some collective objective or collective subjectivity. It's just what's right to the people that are going to do what I want them to do, whether that's vote for me, whether that's, buy me something nice on Father's Day, whatever it is. We're trying to manipulate that target audience. And some of these people are doing a very good job of it, sadly.
Well, Stephen brings up a point here. Stephen Blazarian says, how can law enforcement officers operate when the law is no longer the standard by which we evaluate their actions? The law has been superseded by political motivations and emotions. And to his point, so like I'm in Asheville, and like I said, there's graffiti all over everything, BLM, and right next to Black Lives Matter, there's gang graffiti, F the cops and all this stuff, monuments destroyed. And I felt a sense of like I'm jaywalking, I'm like, what are they going to do, man? Because I can see the cops are neutered. They're not even on. There's a zero presence on the street, and nobody's taking action against anything that I see going on here. And there was a sense of, I had to catch it. It was almost subconsciously like, okay, I can see laws don't matter. I can drink a beer on the street. I can do whatever, right? But the law is being unequally, like the masses aren't really receiving the law enforcement, but the law enforcement are receiving this overcorrection. I don't know.
Yeah. And you're a morally sound guy, right? And here you are walking through this area and you're thinking like this. Now imagine if you didn't have the moral structure that you have. Then maybe throwing a brick through a window is okay. Maybe punching this 90-year-old woman walking down the street is okay, and taking her wallet. But to Steve's question, you can't. As a law enforcement officer, you can't. Every cop will tell you a story about enforcing laws they don't agree with, right? We all know about laws. All of us do. The one that I used to hate was, for a while when I first came in the bureau, we were going after deadbeat dads, and we were federally arresting them. Okay. Do I like deadbeat dads? Of course not. Do I think that federal prison is the proper response to a deadbeat dad? No, I don't. Okay. I disagreed with that law. Did I enforce it? Yeah, I did. Most cops can tell stories exactly like that. But if the law is not being enforced, if it's not being supported by the people above you, what I think you're going to find is the police officers are going to do what they were calling the Ferguson effect there for a while. Is just they're not going to enforce anything, right? Especially if I know, look, if I go out here and do my job and I do it the way I was trained and I do it according to the laws as I understand them right now, I'm going to get buckled up because some prosecutor has an agenda and my family's going to, be impacted. I'm going to be impacted. How do I work in that environment? Well, the simple answer is, Steve, you can't. You can't work in that environment. Law enforcement, right? In law, you have to have the laws to enforce. If the laws are in flux, if they're constantly being changed at the whim of a person in an office downtown that is not out here doing what we're doing, then how can I hit that moving target? It's like trying to shoot a bullet out of the air with another bullet while I'm riding a horse. I mean, I just can't do it. And that level of frustration is going to lead to cynicism. It's going to lead to wholesale departure from the profession. And I think we're going to be in a much more difficult position when that happens than if we didn't. What seems to be getting lost in all this shuffle is people get into law enforcement for virtuous reasons. All right. And the system is set up to weed out the rampaging racists and to weed out the megalomaniacs and the psychopathic violent people, right? The people that we hire in law enforcement, the people we recruit in law enforcement, the people that tend to gravitate towards law enforcement are altruistic people who want to help at a base level. Boil it all down. They want to help. They want to be helpful. They want to save that life. They want to stop that bad guy. They want to minimize the damage that bad actors can do. We seem to be forgetting that. And now we're going after an entire class of people, police officers, and calling them racist and calling them, most of us are pretty thick skinned about it. We can blow that off, but that's onesies and twosies. When entire sections of supposed to be supporting us, the prosecutors and the civil leadership are turning on us as well. That's a little bit different animal, right? Who wants to necessarily marinate in that environment? I don't see how people are getting recruited into this job at all, frankly, and kept. I don't know, especially people like I happen to know Steve. I know some of the people that are on here now. They're smart guys. They're smart folks that could do very well in any profession that they chose to go into. We as a society are fortunate that they decided to go into law enforcement. When they start leaving to go do better things in other professions, make more money, live better lives, not be constantly abused or on the knife edge of getting sued and put in prison, I think as a society, we're going to be the losers in that rubric. You know, guy like you goes into law enforcement. That's great for the society. Guy like you leaves law enforcement. That's a loss for the society. Well, now think of, there are 800,000 cops roughly in this country. 300,000 of them decide to go do something else. What the hell are we going to do then?
Yeah.
Are these folks just suddenly going to go home and stop being a problem? Or, are other, subgroups going to step up to fill that void? I was watching a video the other day of some Black Lives Matter and some Antifa folks in Long Beach. They were getting ready to raise hell. And who rolls up on them but a group of Crips? and not the folks you necessarily want enforcing social order, but they were effective. I mean, I got to give them that. Not bound by, societal rules or laws. There's no use of force continuum for a guy in the Crips, right?
Nope.
He just got out of Pelican Bay for 5 years. He's not going to put up with your silly crap. You're going to be praying for a nice officer friendly here in a minute, because this guy's going to do you, your family, burn your house down, kill your dog, anybody that owes you money. I mean, those are real deal bangers that are out there doing things like that. Is that what we want to do? We want to balkanize into, little subgroups and warlords running their, territory? I would suggest no, that's not what we want. But, what do I know?
Yeah. Andrew says, referencing Sean's comment, that the truth doesn't matter. Certainly true with general public discourse. It may well matter in actual court. Zimmerman acquitted, Baltimore cops acquitted, etc. Despite all efforts to convict. Publicly, their reputations are destroyed, but they are not in prison. And thank God that they are not at the end of the day. And of course, if you're, no one hates a bad cop more than good cops. You know what I'm saying? So if they've done something wrong, they deserve to be punished, and just like anyone else. Let me talk to you about the next one. Will law enforcement change as we move into the 21st century? If so, what are some of the material changes that you see coming forward, TC?
I think it'll absolutely change. And, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. All right. Law enforcement is certainly different now than it was 100 years ago. It's certainly different now than it was 200 years ago. So as hidebound as we tend to be in this profession, we tend to be fairly conservative folk. And we tend to be very like, that was good enough for me. I carried a wheel gun. That's good enough for you, right? Can't get it done in 6. You can't get it done at all. We've all heard those stories. So law enforcement needs to evolve. It needs to change, because at the end of the day, we're policed by consent in this country, right? It's not a police state. The vast majority of people agree, okay, these are the laws we're going to abide by as a society, and we're going to have law enforcement to make sure everybody stays within the bounds, and we're going to move along. Well, there seems to be a fundamental shift going on. And when this all calms down, some of this sediment is going to stick around. Okay. So yeah, I think law enforcement is going to change. And I don't necessarily think all of it is bad, right? There are a lot of things that police get called to that are ridiculous and they shouldn't be called to, right? You don't need somebody with a badge and a gun to go and deal with 2 10-year-olds that get in a fist fight behind the school and the parents are now arguing with each other. All right, that's ridiculous. It's a parenting issue. You don't need, and I've actually been in state police barracks when that phone call came in. They wanted a state trooper to come out and settle a schoolyard fist fight. That's asinine. Okay, it's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources, a waste of talent. So trimming some of that stuff off, I think, is not necessarily a bad idea. I think most law enforcement officers that you talk to can give you chapter and verse on what kind of calls they get that they shouldn't go to. Mental health issues in this country have largely fallen on law enforcement to deal with. All right. So we used to have, and I know you remember as a child, I remember as a child, that there used to be insane asylums. We had different names for them. We had, touchy-feely names. That's fine. I don't wish to offend anybody who's ever spent any time in an insane asylum. Joe Allaire, I'm looking hard at you. But they're gone now, right? We had One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came out, and suddenly those things are terrible, and we shut them all down. Well, the mentally ill didn't disappear.
Right.
Right. So where are they now? Well, look at Cook County. I mean, 75% of their inmates in the Cook County jail have mental health issues.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can put mental health issues back in the mental health realm and take it out of law enforcement, I think is a good thing. It's good for society. It's good for law enforcement. It's certainly good for the people that have the mental health issues. So there are areas where I think we can make those changes, and we should make those changes. I don't think that making them as a response to a rioting mob in the middle of the street that are tearing down structures and burning buildings is the right way to make sober, intelligent responses on a policy issue going forward. Because in my mind, I'm certainly not representative of everybody. You may have a good argument. You may have a very good argument. I'll listen to your argument until you pick up a brick, right? Whatever your issue is, as soon as you start hurting people and blowing things up, burning things, you lose me. All right. Example, I thought the Palestinians had a pretty good argument about, hey, we lost our country. We didn't get a say in that fact until they started blowing things up. And they kind of lost me at that point, right? And you start killing people that weren't involved. Same thing's happening here. You may have a good point, Black Lives Matter. I can't hear it through all the noise that's being made around what you're doing. But the way you're going about making the point, you lose me completely, right? You absolutely lose me. So having sober, deliberate conversation, I think, is appropriate. Figuring out the way we as a society want to be policed, I think, is appropriate. Jim Comey was talking about it back in the day, whether you like him or hate him. He was talking about the going dark issues on phones and what have you. We need to discuss how we want to address this as a society, what level of police state and safety we want to involve ourselves in, and what level of risk we're willing to accept. Those are appropriate conversations. Burning down buildings and throwing bricks is not the way to make sound policy decisions. And responding to people who are burning down buildings and throwing bricks in that moment of passion is not a good way, I would suggest, of making sober, intelligent decisions. So how is law enforcement going to look going forward? I don't know that we're going to be able to change the law enforcement approach to things overnight. I think that if we kind of parse down their level of duties and the things that they are called to intervene in, I think you will still see largely the same sort of approach to things. I think there's going to be more of a focus on what we want to call police for and where we want to send police officers. Because let's face it, we've all seen the memes floating around. It's all well and good to want to send a de-escalation expert until you're dealing with a 6'8" guy who's buck naked, carrying a samurai sword, and has a erect member, and he's covered himself in his own feces. Right? That's not the time for a de-escalation expert. You need a law enforcement officer at that point, and those people are just going to be there. You're going to have to deal with them. But I think that if we can parse down the number of duties that law enforcement are called upon to perform, the number of incidences that they are called upon to respond to, I think we're going to see some of that going forward over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, great response. And we're coming up on an hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time. I got 1 or 2 questions left for you. Thank you to the 48 folks that are joining us live. We're on with Dr. T.C. Fuller, retired FBI agent, former Army officer, etc. There's a couple of things on here. I'm reading the comments, TC. Some people are saying bring back the mental health hospitals. I completely agree with that. They didn't just disappear. Like you said, they're always going to be with us, and putting them in prison with prisoners that do nothing but prey on them daily is not the right answer. Nobody wants that. One of the questions here or comments maybe from Stephen is, an effort to reduce policing can replace defunding policing. Police don't need to respond to many assignments, which will result in reducing funding. Same result, different path. He may have a point. And I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying. And a lot of departments, the patrol sergeant, here's the call, come out and says, we're not responding to that. Call them back, let them know I'm not coming to break up your fight, like you said, between you and your 10-year-old. That's not our job.
Yeah. And it takes a certain amount of strength for that individual to make that call and a knowledge that, hey, my lieutenant's got my back, my captain's got my back, the people up my chain are going to support me. As soon as you remove that support, then that sergeant's not making that call. Saying, we're going out. And now the patrol officer shows up. Now, does he make the call? Well, so you have to be on solid footing to do that. And I would say Steve's in a much better position to comment on the specifics of that sort of thing than I am, because he's a currently serving law enforcement officer. But you have to reduce some of this stuff just in response to what's going on now. I think you're going to see that, especially when they start to make these cuts. Defund the police is a buzz phrase of the day. hopefully that will lose some traction and there will be some more intelligent and sober conversation around that topic.
Where I would question you is, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, TC, but where is this going politically? Do you think the pendulum is swinging and people, regular Americans out in the flyover states are watching this on their TV going, man, I am voting in November. I am getting out there and we got to put a stop to this. What do you think?
Well, I think that 6 months ago, the idea that Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump in the general election was ridiculous. Even the Democrats knew that just wasn't going to happen. Anybody that ever worked with that guy, the challenger, should be concerned that that's the best that they could come up with in the entire Democratic Party. When I worked up on Capitol Hill, he was a bit of a joke. He was vice president when I was up there. And I'll talk to you offline about some of the stuff that was going on around him, but it was ridiculous. So the idea that he would be president over a populist leader like Donald Trump was just not in the cards. And I think everybody knew it. Here we are now. You have to admit that pandemonium and a derailed economy don't favor the incumbent.
Yeah.
They favor the challenger. I'm not saying it was necessarily deliberate. Could have been. I mean, Bill Maher was calling for derailing the economy and hoping for a recession 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Which I thought was wildly irresponsible, but who am I? So how does this play out in November? I think it certainly has raised the challengers' chances. It has made it less a sure thing for the incumbent. But I think your point is well made. There are a lot of law and order folk in this country. There are a lot of regular folk that think what's going on is asinine, that aren't going to put up with it. And I think they'll hit the ballot box. I think a lot of the folks that didn't vote for Hillary last time around, that didn't vote at all because it was a foregone conclusion, according to the media, that she was going to walk off with the election, so they didn't bother to show up. I think they'll show up this time. I think you'll see numbers higher at the polls this year than perhaps 4 years ago. I think that will be the political impact. But I think you'll also see that on the right. Okay, the folks that are going to vote for Trump are those that might have stayed home. I think are going to be more inclined to make sure they get their vote out there. So I think we're going to see a general rising in the numbers of voters. I tend to think that the incumbent is going to run away with it, even now. But we'll see. I mean, I've certainly wrong last time around.
Yeah, and that Gordon comments, good morning, Gordon. It says they either see it, agree with it, and vote Biden, or they see it, want law and order, and vote Trump. And I think it's as binary as that.
Yeah, and there, let's face it, there are a lot of people often referred to as the silent majority in this country who, may agree with some of the, we don't want systemic racism. None of us do. We don't want to see, people killed by the police of any color for reasons that, that they don't need to be killed. In the immortal words of Clint Smith, some people just need killing. We all understand that, but most people don't.
All right.
But a lot of the silent majority, I mean, it makes me laugh that some of these Antifa and BLM folks seem to, they want to overthrow the laws and they want it down with the police and this, that. They don't seem to realize that the only reason they're not being slain in droves is because the vast majority of us respect the law. And, I used to tell people in the FBI, the reason that some people are still alive is because it's illegal to kill them.
That's right.
Well, you remove that law, you remove those restraints, and that knife cuts both ways, right?
Yeah.
It really does. And that's why I always laugh when I hear, Antifa's coming to the suburbs or coming out into the countryside. I'm like, as a federal law enforcement agent, there was no way on God's earth I was going to go up if they decided to impound all firearms. I wasn't going up in the hills of Kentucky to take anybody's gun. No, I mean, one, I disagreed with it. Two, you won't come back, right? You get up in them hollers, them boys don't play. Well, there's a lot of folks in this country that are in that boat. They just, look, leave me be. You don't mistake courtesy and, a calm demeanor for weakness, right? I leave you alone because the law says I have to leave you alone because I can't be bothered with, for coming and finding you. You come into my neighborhood and cause a problem and the laws don't apply, you're going to see a little different response, is my guess, in a vast majority of this country. Law and order benefits us all, right? The only reason you get to go out and protest and say the crazy shit you say on the street corners is because you live in a country that's ruled by laws. right? You couldn't pull that stuff in Russia. You couldn't pull that stuff in China. You couldn't pull it in Cuba or North Korea. You can pull it here. So my suggestion is you probably ought to support the laws a little bit more than you do, because they're the only things keeping your sorry ass alive. My opinion. Could be wrong.
I completely agree with you. I used to chuckle every time, arresting someone or what have you, and they'd said, "You ain't nothing without that badge and a gun." I'm like, "You don't know me.
You don't know me. You don't know where I've been."
Since I was 10 years old, I've been in the dojo and I'm on the range multiple times a week, pal. This badge and gun protects you.
Right.
That's all that's standing between you and me preying on you. Which I don't think there's a segment of society that don't understand that, and I pray they never see that.
No, I mean, there's a meme that runs around that says, that lock on my front door is not there to protect me. There's a lot to be said for that. I mean, and again, nobody wants us to go down that road. I certainly don't want us to go down that road. We've been to countries. I know you have. I've been to countries where the law doesn't apply. Right, Afghanistan, Iraq, places where there's just complete and utter lawlessness. There's a reason those people are trying to get here, right? You don't want that. I don't want that. I certainly don't want to see that happen in my country. And I'm hopeful that cooler heads prevail and that people calm the hell down. We'll see if that actually happens.
I mean, everywhere there's no law enforcement presence, guess the law is provided by your local warlord. How does that sound?
Right. All of a sudden, all the guys playing for the NFL, now they're local warlords because they're bigger than everybody else.
That's right.
Right? God created man, Sam Colt made him equal. Right. We don't want the law of the gun to overwhelm the rule of law.
No.
So, part of my advice to the BLM and Antifa folks is be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, because we saw with Chaz, right? I mean, as soon as we're going to have the summer of love. Now let's build a wall and let's arm people and and whatever capricious they're having, that's what the law will be. The guy with the AR, the dreadlocks will decide what's going to go on. And it's like, guys, this is exactly what you said was not going to happen is the first thing you decided to do, right? And extortion went on, right? I mean.
And murder, right?
And murder, yeah.
I mean, you've got, 3 dead in Chaz? And of course, they didn't cooperate with law enforcement, I guess, out of a philosophical disagreement. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but is that really how you want to see not just a little section of Seattle, but the entire nation? I would suggest no. I mean, hell, people were freaking out because they couldn't get toilet paper.
Yeah.
Imagine if you now can't get law enforcement, you can't get water, you can't get fire. It's not a set of circumstances that anybody wants or that we're prepared to live through. I mean,
Penny has a great point. I want to bring this up because I've been talking about this a lot with my own family and friends. Penny says, we are asking law enforcement for more training. What areas do you see the public needing more education about our laws and policing policies? And I would say that if you look back at like my grandparents, for some reason, my grandmother had her report card, and every single year there was a civics. She had to attend civics. And I talked to her about that. Of course, I didn't go to civics classes. That wasn't around, but they explain the laws. They explain the bodies of government. They explain how bills are created and all this stuff. And I think that we've taken that away, and I think we're reaping some of the results of that. What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I remember as a kid, and you're probably old enough to remember this too, having been a star on Romper Room as you were.
That's right.
That you remember the old Schoolhouse Rock?
Yeah, absolutely.
I distinctly remember in 7th grade, we had a test that you had to verbatim write out the preamble to the Constitution. And I remember during the test, everywhere in the room, you could hear that old Schoolhouse Rock tune that people were humming. We the people, I'm in my 50s now. I still have the entire preamble of the U.S. Constitution memorized because I sing that freaking song.
That's right.
You can't expect people to take pride in a tribe, whatever that tribe is, without giving them context, without giving them history. A very good example that I know will resonate with you is the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Okay. The Marine Corps, far and away, is better at self-marketing to their own people than any other branch of the service. Okay. We all make jokes about, okay, you can always tell a Marine's car going down the road because there's an EGA sticker somewhere on that vehicle. You'll see an Eagle Globe and Anchor somewhere on that car because it instills a sense of pride. right? The Marine Corps is a very, very proud organization. And there are some very practical reasons for that. But they do that by teaching their history, by teaching their acolytes to be proud of that history. All right. I think this is where we're kind of straying off the path in the United States. We're not doing a real good job of teaching that pride, in schools. It's left up to us as parents to do it. Certainly we can look at it warts and all. I think we should look at it warts and all. We should take a good hard look at how we treated Native Americans in this country. We should take a good hard look at the 85 or 90 years of slavery that between the founding of the United States and the Civil War. I think we should take a look at that and teach it so that these mistakes aren't made again. But you can't just whitewash it and pretend it didn't happen. You can't not teach the history of this nation and the functions of government and how this government functions, how you are ruled, and expect people to be proud of it. And if you don't teach it in a formal setting, someone's going to tell them, right, that nature abhors a vacuum, right? People will fill it in with whatever gobbledygook makes sense to them, that appeals to them. Then you end up with sort of this balkanization that we're seeing now. People are splitting into sub-tribes because the overarching tribe isn't doing a very good job of teaching people to be proud of that tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple quick things here, and then we'll close it out. TC, Linda says this is one of the best programs. Great information. Thank you, Linda. Chuck says balanced education system with conservative educators. Too many left extremists. I can't say I disagree with that at all, Chuck. I think you're onto something. Sean says you can always tell a Marine. You can't tell him much, but you can tell him. Yeah. Good point. Brett says, great show. Thank you. Vince says, when we have Americans in the streets chanting death to America like they do in Iran, we are in trouble. And I think that leads back to your point of the balkanization, because that's certainly not, that's a fringe element, but that ideology is somewhat pervasive right now. And I don't know how we step back from the abyss at a time like now. I mean, how do you get out of this? Do you see a way out of this?
Were I emperor, the first thing you got to do is reinstill the rule of law. You can't have rioters making these decisions. You can't have people out walking around on freeways, shutting down commerce. And oh, by the way, it's dangerous, right? You get run over on freeways. There's a reason people don't walk on those things. And we've got to do a better job of teaching people to be proud of this country. I mean, you remember September 12th, right? I mean, you couldn't find an American flag in the store. They were being flown everywhere. There was a lot of pride in this country then. Here we are less than a generation later, and this is what we have on TV instead. It doesn't help that we have, generally speaking, one agenda being taught in school from K through 12, and then certainly in colleges. We need to be in a position where people discuss these things rationally and calmly, and they're taught factual history in its entirety, right? You can't pick your facts. Get the facts and make your decisions based on the facts. But get the facts, get all of them, not just the ones that you like, not just the ones that appeal to you. And they have to be taught by people that are teaching them for the purpose of educating their populace, not for purposes of driving their own political agenda. I've always been of the opinion that if my fifth grader knows your politics as her teacher, you failed as a teacher, right? You should teach the children how to think, not what to think.
Agree.
So that would be my answer to that question. It took us a while to get in this position. It's going to take us a while to get out of it.
That's right. And, I remember your point, getting back to the rule of law and the facts versus feelings. I remember that I was being appointed as a special investigator for this really significant investigation. And so they pull me in the office. The convening authority for the court martial does. He hands me the letter. I look at the person I was going to investigate, and I said, "Sir, just so you're aware, I know this person intimately. I knew him, a decade ago." He goes, "What's your opinion of him?" I think, and I'm going to say exactly what I said. So I said, "I think he's a fucking scumbag." And he said, "Can you set aside your prosecutory mindset and give me a clear and complete, unbiased investigation?" I said, "Absolutely. The facts will be what they are. This is not my feelings on this guy. We'll see what the evidence says. And hopefully it'll, may exonerate the guy." Of course it didn't. And he ended up getting kicked out of the Marine Corps, as he should have. But that's the thing. Let's refocus on the facts. I understand you have feelings about things that are going on right now. Tensions are high. I respect that. But when your feelings don't conform to the facts, I think we need to reorientate America onto those founding tenets and facts.
And it speaks to, education system, right? If we're teaching people that feelings trump facts, we've taught the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
We're not teaching, do feelings have value? Yeah, sure. Okay. It's not necessarily my meta narrative, but I accept that that's other people's perspective, and that's fine. But allowing your feelings to, shape the facts is, it's just, in my mind, it's not a defensible position. Of course, I'm not in charge, so.
No, maybe you should be. All right, TC, we've been on here an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you to the 56 folks that have been joining us. Any final closing remarks, sir?
You know what? Keep your head on swivel, people. This too shall pass. Do good. Try to take care of yourself, and if you can't, take care of other people, right?
Well said. Well, guys, Semper Fi, that means always faithful. Stay safe out there. And remember, the fight is coming. Be ready.